James, what's your read? Do you think we will see a more united States of America?
Well, no, and I actually don't really think that that speech did a lot to help that cause of unifying the United States of America. Look, that was a really political speech. You know, you dive down into what he actually said there, and that was a very cynical effort from a guy who is now trying to walk back the fact that he and his party have driven so much of the division. You know, just the other day, Joe Biden was tweeting about Donald Trump being a dictator, being a wannabe dictator. Nancy Pelosi was talking about how this is not an election like any other. The entire future of the nation is on the line. And yet, the stuff that he mentioned mostly was stuff, you know, it was all coded sort of stuff to his supporters, all about, you know, this is the right wing that's violent. You know, January 6th, the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot, which turns out to be a little more complicated when you dive into the FBI's role into that sort of thing. But, you know, no mention, you know, who mentioned the 2020 riots? Well, no mention of 2020, the Black Lives Matter riots, the very violent Antifa riots that rocked the country and cities across the nation. You know, no discussion of the left's real role in ratcheting up this rhetoric. So I think it's very, very cynical. But as to whether or not he centers himself, well, yeah, he centers himself, but Joe Biden that we just saw there, you know, the contrast between him 24 plus hours after this assassination attempt, sounding hoarse, sounding a little slurry, not articulating the words fantastically, versus what we saw of Donald Trump, you know, moments after being winged in the ear by an assassin's bullet, you know, getting up, standing up, defiant, yelling, fight. The contrast between these two candidates cannot be any clearer.
But isn't Trump the original, you know, person, pioneer of the rage rhetoric?
Well, no, I'd actually disagree with that, because if you dive back and you go back to 2016 when he was running for president, you know, the Hitler comparisons all started. And by the way, they have been comparing Republicans to Hitler literally since 1948 and Thomas E. Dewey. This is just the standard playbook for the Democrats. Everybody should be really aware of this. But no. The attempt to denormalize Donald Trump started from the very beginning. Has Donald Trump said a lot of things that are really out there and divisive? Absolutely. Not going to shy away from that at all. But, you know, like for Joe Biden to suddenly say, okay, now, we're going to tamp down the rhetoric, you know, after pouring fire himself, or his own social media team and his own speechwriters fuel onto that fire. I'm sorry, I just find it really rich.
So you think his campaign and rhetoric will change as a result?
Look, I don't think so, because what we've just seen there is that, you know, it's very much pointing the finger at the other side. There's no true path to unity here. But I mean, I think the thing is, too, that Joe Biden isn't going anywhere, because Democrats are now saying, we are in the polls. We know that we are screwed. This is a really big problem for us. Every Republican is going to vote for Trump now. The turnout issue for them is completely solved. And, you know, Kamala Harris, if you're Kamala Harris, you don't want to go up and take this loss. You want to, you know, go again in 4 years when you can have a clean run at this.
Annalise, what are Republican voters saying?
Look, Republican voters are angry, and James is absolutely right. This is an enlivening issue for them. Anyone who was considering voting for Donald Trump is now very emboldened to do so, and this is a non-compulsory voting country. It seems like none of the messages have got through to Joe Biden. He has a very full week this week of campaigning, while his campaign's actually said they've stopped running ads because they don't want to be seen as leaping on this particular moment in time to inflame any more of the political divisions. He's cancelled a planned event in Texas tomorrow, and instead will be taking briefings in the Situation Room about the security for the next week and for Donald Trump's personal Secret Service as they're investigating what went wrong in Pennsylvania. He is, however, travelling to the NAACP conference and doing 2 sit-down interviews. And so it seems that his team has got the message that he has to do more media to prosecute his case, because he simply can't do what they've been doing previously and just avoiding the media altogether and telling everyone everything is fine. They know he needs to stump up and show that now if they're going to continue this campaign. But we're going to have a very unified front here in Milwaukee. Donald Trump's here now. Even the last holdout from the Republican primaries, Nikki Haley, has not only told all her delegates to vote for Donald Trump in that arena, so they all will, she's now been invited to speak. And there's no loss of love between Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. Obviously, they're just fundamentally very different Republicans. The fact they're coming together is their moment of unity, and so they can highlight what's going wrong for the Democrats, because even if you want to argue that they're united, they're certainly unenthusiastic.
James, what do you make of the international reaction, especially out of the Kremlin?
Well, I haven't seen what the Kremlin has said so far, but I think that the international reaction...
Basically, that is the Biden administration that's whipped up the rhetoric that's resulted in this.
Well, I mean, look, I would absolutely hate to ever be on the same side as the Kremlin. Like, let's just get that very, very clear out there. But, I mean, there is something to the point.
But you do agree.
Well, look, what I'll say is this, is that, you know, I'll say this. The responsibility for shooting at Donald Trump and also killing and wounding those spectators in the crowd lies entirely with the person who pulled the trigger and anybody else who may have been involved. We don't know if anybody else was or if this was a lone person. That said, you have an environment now where the rhetoric, which Joe Biden himself acknowledged, so Joe Biden would acknowledge that the rhetoric and the temperature in the United States is very, very high when it comes to the debate. The only question is who's responsible for dialing up the temperature. Now, you know, plenty of blame can be laid at Donald Trump's feet on that. But my God, if you spend any time on, you know, reading left-wing media, reading even mainstream papers like the Washington Post, the New York Times, watching CNN, MSNBC, listening to people like Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden. You know, there were 7 Democrat congressmen who moved a bill to deny Donald Trump any Secret Service protection at all on the grounds that he was a convicted felon in that very trumped-up charge, so to speak, out of New York. Now, don't tell me that there's not an awful lot of hate out there to Donald Trump. There's a huge amount of hate out there to Donald Trump on the left. And, you know, somebody who is, and again, we don't know the motives, we don't know what happened, we don't know anything about this alleged shooter, including the fact that he seems to be the only 20-year-old in the world without a social media presence, but that's another issue. The temperature here has been dialed way up by very extreme rhetoric on the left, saying that Donald Trump is not normal and that if he wins again, democracy as we know it is over. That's creating this idea that he's an existential threat.
Speech has the impact that he intended. Thank you so much for your time, Annalise Nielsen in Milwaukee, and Sky News host James Morrow.